I can't mimic voices for love or money. I'm completely hopeless at it. I was a really bad actor at school, and I've never been able to master the art of mimicry. But my husband, he does it brilliantly. He can do all the voices.
In 2024, a careless remark at a royal gathering would unravel a legacy, igniting a scandal that no one saw coming. Laura Lopes, daughter of Queen Camilla, thought she was making a harmless joke about Princess Anne. But when that joke went viral, it sparked a firestorm that would expose deep-seated tensions, betrayals, and secrets within the royal family.
I think just the qualities that are essential for somebody in a leadership role. I think it's important to grow into a particular role with the right characteristics and the right qualities, and I think she's exemplified that in everything she's done.
What began as a passing quip soon became the catalyst for a shocking revelation, one that would shatter reputations, tear apart family bonds, and forever alter the monarchy's image. This is the story of how one comment changed everything. At the heart of the gathering was Laura Lopes, the daughter of Camilla, the queen consort. She, like many of the others, was caught up in the jovial atmosphere, and as often happens in these relaxed settings, the conversation turned playful. Surrounded by a small group, she made a comment about her aunt, Princess Anne, one of the most respected and stalwart figures in the royal family. "She looks like she belongs in a museum, right next to the antique relics," Laura laughed, her voice full of light-hearted humor. It was the kind of remark one might expect from a family gathering, an offhand joke, perhaps a little cheeky, but ultimately harmless in the context of the moment. The comment, like so many that pass unnoticed at such gatherings, could have easily faded into the background, remembered only by those in the room. But Laura didn't realize that her words were about to escape those four walls. Among the partygoers was Eleanor Shaw, an American vlogger who was filming a behind-the-scenes video for her followers. At the time, she was not expecting to capture anything remotely controversial. Her camera was meant to capture the atmosphere, the glamour, the famous faces, and the luxury of the evening. But then Laura's voice cut through the noise. Eleanor, unknowingly, had just filmed the moment that would change everything. What began as a brief snippet, a few seconds of a laughing Laura making a throwaway remark, would soon spread across social media, finding its way into the hands of millions. The clip was uploaded to platforms like Instagram and X, where it immediately went viral. It wasn't long before the backlash started to grow. Social media users, especially those who held Princess Anne in the highest regard, were quick to voice their anger. Laura was quickly labeled arrogant, entitled, and disrespectful, someone who didn't understand the value of tradition or the respect due to the senior members of the royal family. To many, Princess Anne represented more than just another royal figure. She had spent decades dedicated to the monarchy, carrying the weight of royal duty with an unyielding sense of responsibility. She was known for her discipline, her no-nonsense attitude, and her devotion to the values of the crown. For those who admired her, Laura's joke felt like a direct attack on those very principles. The online outrage was swift and sharp. Older generations, who had watched Princess Anne dedicate her life to service, took to social media in droves, defending her legacy and condemning Laura's remarks. Comments flooded in from all corners, many expressing dismay at the idea of someone so closely tied to the royal family making such a comment. "Who even is Laura Lopes to disrespect a royal icon?" one user commented. Another remarked, "Princess Anne walked so these girls could party." For many, it wasn't just a critique of Laura's joke. It was a generational clash, with older Britons seeing a decline in respect for royal tradition and values. Meanwhile, Laura's mother, Camilla, was in the middle of a different kind of storm. As the queen consort, she had weathered many controversies and public scrutiny over the years, but this was something else. Her daughter, whom she had worked so hard to shield from the pressures of public life, had just become the center of an online firestorm. In a panic, Laura called her mother. Her voice trembled with emotion. "Mom, I was just joking," she explained, as if trying to downplay the magnitude of what had happened. "I didn't think it would go this far." The weight of the moment was clear in her voice. She couldn't have known that a harmless quip would soon find itself at the center of a royal scandal. Camilla, seasoned in managing royal public relations, wasn't calm either. However, her concern was not necessarily about the insult itself, but rather the fallout that would surely follow. Her response wasn't one of sympathy. Instead, she snapped. "Why would you let yourself be filmed?" she asked, her tone sharp. "You know how this family works. You have to be careful." The frustration in her voice was palpable, and it only grew as the implications of the situation began to sink in. But what neither of them knew at that moment was that Princess Anne had already seen the video. It was playing on a screen in her study at Gatcombe Park, far away from the glittering halls of Sandringham. Anne, who had spent much of her life carrying out her duties without fanfare or attention, had witnessed Laura's words. She didn't react immediately. There were no public outbursts, no calls to the media. Instead, Anne did what she had always done. She took a step back, kept her emotions in check, and thought carefully about how to respond. It wasn't just a passing insult to her personal pride that bothered Anne. It was something deeper. The comment, in Anne's eyes, was more than just disrespect. It was indicative of a broader pattern, a disregard for the monarchy's values and the traditions that had been upheld for generations. It was, in her mind, a sign of exploitation. She had seen enough of this sort of behavior over the years. The monarchy was becoming something else entirely, something different from what she had dedicated her life to preserving. In the privacy of her study, Anne made a decision. She would investigate, and, as always, she would do so with precision and thoroughness. This wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about getting back at Laura for a careless remark. No, this was about understanding what had gone wrong and whether there was something more to the situation, something that needed to be addressed before it grew out of control. The investigation would begin, quietly and discreetly, but it would not end until the full truth was uncovered. In the meantime, Camilla and Laura could only wait, unaware that the events set in motion that night at Sandringham would soon unravel in ways neither could have predicted. As the viral fallout continued to spread, Laura found herself caught in a whirlwind she hadn't anticipated. The comment she had made, originally meant to be a passing joke, was now a point of public controversy. The backlash was relentless. Social media flooded with condemnations of her comment, and the royal family's supporters were quick to react. It wasn't just a minor misstep. It was a calculated insult in the eyes of many, and the consequences of her words were about to ripple through her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. In the midst of the storm, Laura's first instinct was to reach out to her mother. She picked up the phone and called Camilla, her voice shaky as she tried to explain herself. "Mom, it wasn't meant to be like that. I was just joking. I didn't mean any harm." She stumbled over her words, panic creeping into her voice as she realized just how serious the situation had become. The tone of the online backlash felt like a distant storm, but now it was knocking at her door. What she had thought would be an innocuous comment had now evolved into a full-fledged scandal. On the other end of the line, Camilla listened quietly. She had seen her fair share of royal controversies and public scandals, but this was different. This wasn't just about a media misstep or a failed public appearance. It was about an internal rift within the royal family. The insult had been aimed at Princess Anne, one of the most respected and long-serving members of the royal bloodline. Camilla, a seasoned figure in royal affairs, was not shaken by the public criticism. She was far more concerned about the internal consequences, the way the family would perceive Laura's actions, and, more importantly, how Princess Anne would respond. "What did you think was going to happen?" Camilla asked, her voice edged with frustration. She wasn't angry with Laura, per se, but she was deeply disappointed. As much as she cared for her daughter, she knew that life within the royal family came with certain expectations. Every word and action was scrutinized. A careless comment, no matter how innocent, could lead to a loss of respect and credibility. "Why would you let yourself be filmed?" she added sharply. The idea of Laura's words being captured and broadcast to the world seemed like a critical misstep, an avoidable mistake. "You know how this family works. You have to be careful," Camilla continued, as though trying to remind her daughter of the weight of their royal status. But Laura had no answers. She had simply acted in the moment, without considering the broader implications of her words. In her mind, it had been a joke, a harmless quip between family members. Yet now she was facing the full force of royal expectations and the public's unforgiving gaze. Laura felt herself sinking deeper into the realization that her joke wasn't funny anymore. The consequences were not just personal, they were very much about the reputation and legacy of the royal family. And that legacy, for better or worse, was largely shaped by Princess Anne, whose unflinching commitment to duty and tradition had earned her the respect of a nation. Meanwhile, Princess Anne herself had already seen the viral clip. As the dust began to settle on the initial backlash, Anne sat in her study at Gatcombe Park, her favorite place of solitude. Her mind, typically focused on her royal duties and charitable work, was now consumed with thoughts of the young woman who had insulted her. Anne, known for her stoic demeanor and unwavering commitment to royal traditions, did not immediately react. There were no dramatic outbursts, no public statements. Instead, she watched the video again, the words ringing in her ears. "She looks like she belongs in a museum," Laura had said, laughing. It was a comment that, in Anne's eyes, represented more than just a slight against her. It was a reflection of a growing disregard for the values she had spent her life upholding. Anne did not immediately call for an investigation. She didn't need to. She knew how to work quietly, how to remain composed while taking action. And so, in her calm and methodical manner, she decided to dig deeper into the situation. What Laura had said wasn't just a personal insult. It was a symptom of a larger issue, one that Anne had witnessed growing over the years, a shift in the way the royal family was viewed and treated. For Anne, this wasn't just about defending her personal honor. It was about defending the values that had defined the monarchy for generations. She instructed one of her most trusted investigators to look into the matter. The inquiry would not be public. It would be discreet, thorough, and surgical. Anne's plan was simple. She needed to understand if Laura's behavior was part of a larger pattern. Had Laura, under the guise of her royal connections, crossed any boundaries that might be seen as inappropriate or exploitative? Anne didn't want to act out of anger. She wanted to know the truth, and she was willing to take her time to uncover it. In the meantime, Camilla began to sense that the situation was slipping further out of her control. She had always been known for her ability to navigate the complexities of royal life, but this time, the stakes felt higher. As a mother, her primary instinct was to protect her child, but as the queen consort, she knew that she also had a responsibility to protect the royal family's reputation. And right now, that reputation was being put at risk, not by an outsider or a tabloid, but by her own daughter's words. The strain between Camilla and Princess Anne, long simmering beneath the surface, seemed to grow even deeper with this new development. Their relationship had always been complicated, filled with years of rivalry and tension. The shadow of Princess Diana still loomed large, and Camilla, despite her position as queen consort, had always struggled to find her place within the royal family. This was no longer just about Laura's mistake. It was about the cracks in the monarchy's structure, the undercurrents of resentment, and the very real possibility that Camilla could lose her standing, not just with the public, but with her own family. But Camilla wasn't the only one feeling the weight of the situation. Anne's investigation was already underway, and soon enough, the results would begin to come to light. What they would find, however, was far more damning than anyone could have expected. What had started as a joke about Princess Anne would soon lead to a much bigger, much more serious revelation, one that would shake the royal family to its core. In the quiet of Gatcombe Park, Anne continued her investigation, unwavering in her determination to uncover the full truth. She knew that the stakes were high, but she was also aware that her role in the monarchy was not just about upholding tradition. It was about ensuring that the royal family remained a symbol of integrity and respect for future generations. And if that meant exposing uncomfortable truths, so be it. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the full extent of the situation would soon become clear. The public's anger, which had been initially directed at Laura for her careless words, would soon shift as the investigation revealed something far more significant, something that would change everything. The investigation that Anne had quietly set into motion was about to reveal something that would further complicate the already tense situation. What had initially seemed like a simple, albeit thoughtless, joke from Laura was now evolving into something much more significant. Princess Anne, driven by a desire to understand the full scope of Laura's actions, had instructed her most trusted investigator to comb through every possible detail of Laura's life, her connections, her public activities, and, crucially, her dealings with the royal family's most valuable and historically sensitive assets. It was a calculated move. Anne knew the importance of these royal items, the legacy they represented, the history they carried. And so, she instructed the investigator to dig deeper into any instances where Laura had come into contact with these artifacts. She specifically requested a look at any items tied to the royal family's past, particularly those that had belonged to Princess Diana. Anne, ever the protector of her late sister-in-law's memory, was determined to ensure that Diana's legacy would never be tarnished or misused, especially by those who had not earned the right to handle it. The investigation didn't take long to uncover something alarming. The records revealed that in September 2021, under the direct approval of Camilla, Laura had borrowed one of the most sacred and iconic pieces of royal jewelry, the sapphire teardrop earrings that had once belonged to Princess Diana. The earrings, so closely associated with Diana's grace, beauty, and strength, had become a symbol of her enduring legacy. The same earrings that had appeared in countless photos of Diana, often worn during key moments of her life, now found themselves in the hands of Laura Lopes. At first glance, this might not seem like a significant issue. After all, the royal family was known to loan out jewelry to various members for public appearances, charity events, and even personal use. But this was different. The circumstances surrounding the borrowing of these particular earrings were far from ordinary. There had been no official approval from the Royal Jewelry Advisory Board, no review of the item's appropriateness for the occasion. Instead, it was a mother's signature, Camilla's signature, that had allowed Laura to wear the earrings without following the established protocols that governed the royal family's most treasured artifacts. The earrings, tied so intimately to Princess Diana's memory, had been loaned out on nothing more than a whim, an act of vanity perhaps, but one that would prove to be incredibly costly. As Anne sat in her study, processing the contents of the investigation, her hands trembled ever so slightly as she read the details. The fact that Camilla had signed off on this loan without consulting the proper channels was a violation of royal protocol. It wasn't just an error in judgment. It was a deliberate choice, one that reflected poorly on both Laura and Camilla. It wasn't as though the earrings had simply been borrowed for a charity event or a public occasion. Laura had worn them to an art auction in Rome, an event where she had presented herself as a royal representative, mingling with high society, taking center stage as a fashionable figure in the public eye. It wasn't about charity. It was about status, image, and the perception of power. And for Laura, wearing the sapphire earrings had been an opportunity to bask in the glamour of it all, unaware that she was stepping into territory far more sensitive than she could have ever imagined. Anne's jaw clenched as she read the report, her eyes narrowing at the line confirming Camilla's approval of the earrings' use. There was no denying the gravity of the situation now. This wasn't a minor breach of etiquette. This was an exploitation of royal heritage, and it was being done under the approval of Camilla herself. It was not just tasteless, it was offensive, especially to those who had respected Princess Diana as a figure of immense personal sacrifice and dignity. Anne's thoughts raced, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her shoulders. She knew that this wasn't something she could ignore. It wasn't just about family tension or personal rivalry. It was about respect. The respect for Diana's memory, for royal tradition, and for the family's values. And if anyone needed to be held accountable for the violation of those values, it had to be Laura, and by extension, Camilla, who had allowed it to happen. With grim resolve, Anne forwarded the report to William. She didn't waste time with explanations. There was no need for dramatic buildup or emotional appeals. She simply attached the documents and included a short, piercing message. "Nephew, I think you need to know this. Your mother's legacy is being exploited." It was a direct statement, without apology or hesitation. Anne knew how this would affect William. He had always been deeply protective of his mother's legacy, and to see Diana's earrings treated as little more than an accessory to Laura's public image would be devastating to him. The email, simple and to the point, was a quiet but powerful warning to both Laura and Camilla that their actions had crossed a line. William's response was swift. As he sat in his office at Kensington Palace, reviewing paperwork, his phone buzzed with the notification of Anne's email. When he saw the subject line, his heart sank. He opened the email with a sense of dread, reading the words that would change everything. The mention of the sapphire earrings hit him like a punch to the gut. Memories of his mother, her warmth, her strength, her love, flooded back in an instant. And now, here they were, being worn by his stepmother's daughter, flaunted as little more than a fashion statement. William's hand tightened into a fist as he absorbed the full weight of what Anne had uncovered. This wasn't just a royal misstep. It was a betrayal of the very essence of his mother's legacy. In a fit of anger, William composed a brief but brutal message to Laura. "I know about the earrings," he wrote, his fingers striking the keys with a sense of finality. "You have no right. Consequences will come." He hit send without hesitation, knowing that this was not a message he could retract. It was a warning, clear and direct. He was no longer going to tolerate the disrespect and exploitation of his mother's memory. Laura, on the other hand, was at home, attempting to navigate the growing public backlash. She had already canceled a few art shows and turned off her phone in an attempt to escape the overwhelming pressure. But when she saw William's name on her phone screen, panic set in. She had heard whispers about the investigation, but now, faced with the reality of William's message, the weight of her actions finally hit her. She had crossed a line, and now the consequences were inevitable. At that moment, Laura couldn't breathe. Her heart raced as she read the words over and over again. Consequences will come. She felt the shame wash over her as she remembered the day she wore the earrings in Rome, how she had enjoyed the attention, how she had basked in the compliments of others, all the while unaware that she was about to be thrust into a royal scandal that would shake her to her core. Tears welled up in her eyes as she called her mother. "William knows," she cried. "He's threatening me. Why did you let me wear them?" Her voice was filled with fear and regret. For the first time, she realized just how much damage her actions had caused, not only to her own reputation, but to the royal family as a whole. Meanwhile, Camilla, though shaken, could not afford to show weakness. She was a member of the royal family, the queen consort, and she had to act accordingly. But this time, the pressure was immense. Her daughter's mistake was about to cost her far more than a few public relations mishaps. It was threatening her place within the royal family, and if the consequences of Laura's actions continued to escalate, it could bring down everything she had worked so hard to build. As the days passed, the weight of the discovery began to settle on the royal family. Princess Anne, ever the meticulous and determined figure, had been quietly laying the groundwork for the next steps. The investigation into Laura's use of Princess Diana's iconic sapphire earrings had reached a point where there could be no turning back. The violation was too great, the disrespect too clear. The royal family, particularly Anne, knew that the integrity of their traditions and values had to be protected. This wasn't just about one woman's mistake. It was about the preservation of the royal legacy itself. With a calm and calculated resolve, Anne convened the Royal Jewelry Advisory Board. These were the people entrusted with the responsibility of maintaining the security and integrity of the royal family's most precious assets. Historians, custodians of the royal collection, and senior advisors were all present. The gravity of the situation was evident as Anne walked into the room, folder in hand. There was no need for dramatic preamble or long speeches. Her presence in itself commanded attention. Without hesitation, she opened the folder and laid out the evidence before them. The documents were damning. The approval from Camilla, the photos of Laura wearing the earrings in Rome, and the absence of any formal consultation with the Royal Jewelry Advisory Board. It was all there. Anne's voice was steady, though there was a distinct edge to it. "This," she began, her tone unwavering, "is an unauthorized breach of royal heritage. These earrings were Princess Diana's. They are not a costume for someone playing royal for the night." There was no mistaking the seriousness in her words. The room fell silent as everyone present understood the implications of what Anne was saying. This wasn't just about a breach of protocol. It was about the exploitation of a legacy that meant so much to so many. Anne's voice never wavered as she presented the facts. The members of the board sat still, absorbing the weight of the evidence. There was no debate, no objections. They knew that the legacy of the royal family, particularly the memory of Princess Diana, could not be treated so carelessly. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was a calculated act that had to be addressed swiftly and decisively. Then Anne dropped the bombshell. There was a rarely used provision in the royal protocols that allowed senior royals to strip access to personal artifacts deemed historically sensitive or vulnerable to misuse. This clause, sealed in Queen Elizabeth II's confidential royal documents, was an emergency measure. It allowed for the recall and safeguarding of royal treasures in cases where their use was deemed inappropriate. Anne invoked this provision, making it clear that the sapphire earrings, as a direct connection to Diana's memory, fell squarely within this category. She knew the consequences of using such a measure would be far-reaching, but it was necessary. The earrings, she declared, would be immediately recalled and placed in the royal vault, sealed away indefinitely. The motion passed without a single raised hand in dissent. The room had made its decision. The earrings would be returned, and a full audit would be conducted on all items that had been lent out in recent years. The royal family's assets would be carefully monitored, and any misuse would be dealt with swiftly. The power of tradition had spoken. The news that the earrings would be recalled soon reached Camilla. It wasn't delivered with fanfare or dramatic press conferences. It was a simple official notice. When Camilla's secretary handed her the document, she could feel the weight of it in her hands before even reading it. The message was clear. The royal family had acted decisively, and the consequences for her and her daughter were now a reality. Camilla read the verdict over and over, each word sinking in deeper with every passing second. The paper trembled in her hands, and her heart began to race. It wasn't just the loss of the earrings that hurt. It was the realization that her standing in the royal family had been irreparably damaged. She had always worked so hard to find her place, to ease into the royal family's inner circle, and now it felt like everything she had built was coming undone. She had signed off on the loan of the earrings, thinking it was a harmless gesture. But now the consequences of that decision were clear. Her daughter's actions had exposed her own vulnerabilities, and now she was being held accountable for them. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a public betrayal of the very values that had upheld the royal family for centuries. Camilla sank into a chair, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. The world she had fought so hard to be a part of was slipping away from her grasp. She had been a part of the royal family for years, but now, with Laura's scandal and the fallout from the earrings, it seemed like her time in the public eye was rapidly drawing to a close. Camilla's reputation was hanging by a thread, and she knew it. The loss of the earrings was just the beginning. The public would soon hear about it, and once the media caught wind of the royal family's decision, there would be no turning back. Across London, the headlines began to spill out. Princess Anne defends Diana's legacy, and royal relics reclaimed were splashed across the front pages of newspapers. The Daily Mail called it a silent war with loud consequences, and social media buzzed with support for Anne. Hashtags like #ProtectDiana's memory and #TrueRoyalBlood quickly trended. The public, particularly those who had long admired Princess Anne's unwavering commitment to the monarchy, rallied behind her. They saw this not just as a matter of jewelry, but as a matter of principle, a stand for tradition, respect, and the memory of Princess Diana. At the same time, Camilla found herself retreating from the public eye. The press didn't hound her in the same way they hounded others in the royal family, but the subtle judgment was unmistakable. Her once warm smile now seemed absent in public appearances. She no longer participated in royal engagements with the same enthusiasm. She stayed mostly at Highgrove, avoiding the spotlight. Her once prominent presence at royal events grew increasingly rare, and when she did appear, the whispers followed. It was as though the public had already moved on from her, and in a way, so had the royal family. The cracks in her carefully curated image had finally shown, and there was no denying the damage. Meanwhile, Laura found herself isolated. The once glamorous art shows, the invitations to high-profile parties, the friends who had once surrounded her. All of it faded away in the wake of the scandal. Her phone remained silent. The calls stopped coming. The public backlash had completely overshadowed everything she had once enjoyed. No one was calling her a royal darling anymore. She was now a pariah, a cautionary tale of someone who had overstepped their boundaries and paid the price. Her only public communication was a short, handwritten letter sent to Anne. The letter was personal and private, unseen by the public. It was an apology, a heartfelt attempt to mend the rift she had caused. But Anne never responded. The silence spoke volumes. There was nothing left to say. Anne's decision had been made, and Laura's fate was sealed. The damage had been done, and no amount of apology could undo the hurt. As the dust settled, Anne received a letter, but not from the media or the royal family. It was from William, her nephew. The letter was simple, one line written in ink on thick, elegant stationery. "Thank you, Aunt. Mom would be proud." Anne folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer beside one of Diana's old brooches, safe and silent. It was a gesture of gratitude from her nephew, acknowledging her actions and the importance of protecting Diana's legacy. Anne knew that this was the ultimate validation. William's approval was all that mattered. Standing by the window of Gatcombe Park, looking out over the rolling English countryside, Anne felt a quiet sense of peace. The storm had passed, but the lesson remained. Some legacies, no matter how tempting, could not be borrowed. They had to be earned, and once they were broken, they could never be mended. As time passed, the ripples of the scandal slowly faded, but the consequences remained firmly etched in the royal landscape. Princess Anne's decisive actions had sealed the fate of both Laura and Camilla, and the echoes of their mistakes reverberated far beyond their immediate circle. For Anne, the matter had been resolved, but the lessons learned would last a lifetime. The royal family had been tested, and while the dust may have settled, it was clear that some cracks had been exposed, cracks that couldn't easily be repaired. In the months that followed, the royal family's public image shifted. Anne's reputation, already solidified as one of the most respected figures in the monarchy, was only strengthened by her actions. She had stood firm, not only in defending the legacy of her late sister-in-law, but in upholding the values that had guided the monarchy for generations. Public opinion shifted in her favor. She was praised for her calm and measured response to a situation that could have easily spiraled out of control. Her speech on legacy, delivered at the Women for Britain ceremony, became a defining moment of her tenure within the royal family. Her words, "Legacy is not a fashion statement, it is a responsibility," resonated deeply with those who saw her as the embodiment of duty and tradition. The applause that followed wasn't just for her eloquence, it was for what she had stood for throughout the entire ordeal. In stark contrast, Camilla retreated from the public eye. Her once vibrant presence at royal engagements became increasingly rare. She was still the queen consort, but her influence was fading, overshadowed by the scandal surrounding her daughter's actions. Photographs of her in public showed a more subdued figure, a far cry from the confident woman who had once charmed the public. The press no longer hounded her, but their silence spoke volumes. They didn't forget the story, and neither did the public. Every rare appearance was met with quiet scrutiny, not necessarily for what she had done, but for what she had allowed to happen. The whispers of discontent, once easily dismissed, had become impossible to ignore. Laura, meanwhile, had been all but erased from the social scene. The once promising art shows, the glamorous parties, and the invitations to exclusive gatherings had all come to a halt. She locked herself away in her luxury apartment, far removed from the world she had once been part of. Her phone remained silent, with only a few distant calls from family members and acquaintances who offered hollow words of sympathy. But the friends who had once adored her for her royal connections had all but disappeared. The public had turned on her, and with it, her social life unraveled. The image she had so carefully crafted, one of grace, sophistication, and royal proximity, had collapsed. She became a social pariah, the subject of online mockery and disdain. The only gesture of reconciliation came in the form of a short handwritten letter sent to Princess Anne. It was a private, personal apology, expressing regret for her actions. But Anne, with her stoic composure, did not respond. She saw the letter, tucked away in a drawer, forgotten by the public, and unread by anyone but Anne herself. There was no need for a response. The damage had been done, and the gulf between Laura and the royal family had become too wide to bridge. In the midst of it all, William sent his own quiet message of gratitude to Anne. A single line, written in elegant ink, "Thank you, Aunt. Mom would be proud." It was a brief acknowledgement, but it meant more than words could convey. For William, the situation had become a matter of family loyalty and legacy. He knew the importance of what Anne had done, and he was grateful for her unwavering commitment to protecting the memory of his mother. The note found its place beside Diana's old brooch, safe and untouched, a reminder of what truly mattered in the end. As Anne stood by the window of Gatcombe Park, staring out over the rolling hills, she felt a quiet sense of peace. The storm had passed, and the royal family had weathered it. But she also understood that some lessons could only be learned through hardship. Legacies, no matter how cherished, could not be taken lightly. They were not for the taking. They had to be earned, protected, and preserved. And once broken, they could never truly heal. The lesson was clear, etched in stone. Some things, once lost, could never be regained.